Welcome to Watchdog on Mint Press. Now, this podcast, as you know, focuses on issues that are largely ignored within the mainstream public sphere. For that reason, it is vital that we have your support. So please like, subscribe, and get involved with what we are doing here. In terms of news this week, it has come to my attention that an organization which worked tirelessly and militated relentlessly against the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, and specifically targeted Jeremy Corbyn, the Board of Deputies has put in its 2020 Trustees report the following sentence. It has a close working relationship with the Embassy of Israel in the UK and links to the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs and IDF. Now, for so long, when people were speaking out against this witch hunt within the Labour Party, they were told that they were being racist. The Palestinian cause is an anti-racist cause, and that was asserted again and again. But yet people, whether it was those agitating on the ground, mobilizing on the ground, going door to door, local activists, all the way up to MPs within the Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party, were punished merely for speaking out on the issue of Palestine. And if any of them were to assert this simple truth, that the Board of Deputies, this organization, was working to some extent in coordination with the Israeli embassy in this country, they were punished. It's not just that the 2020 Trustees report from the Board of Deputy reveals. It also shows how they have been key to normalization efforts within this country. They put forward that they have progressed relations with the Muslim and Arab world, engaging with the embassies of Bahrain, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, and others. We've also seen that in the celebration of the UAE and Israel and Bahrain Abraham Accords, they organized an event to celebrate it with ambassadors from those countries. We also see in their trustees report that they have mobilized against BDS within this country. Is there any doubt that this organization is working as a lobby of the Israeli state? Can we keep the wool over our eyes for much longer? And how will we historicize what has happened to our best hope at a pro-people government within this country in the shape of Jeremy Corbyn? When we tell the story, we must be honest about it. An organization like the Board of Deputies, which claims is representative of the Jewish community in this country, for so long claimed that it had nothing to do with the Israeli embassy. Well, that has been seen to be a lie. Joining us today on the Watchdog, we are joined by a well-known and strident supporter of the Palestinian cause and freedom for people around the world. An actor who came to fame in the show Vampire Diaries. We're joined by Michael Malarkey. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Yeah, really well. Really well. Just continuing to post as much information as I can find and help to spread the truth of the situation of what's happening now and what has happened in the past, and hopefully inspire other people. Obviously, my followers, a lot of them are younger. It spans generations, actually, but I feel like the misinformation and propaganda has been rife for such a long time that it just came to a point where I felt it was my duty to start talking about this stuff after being silent for a long time.
Absolutely, man. And as far as I understand, you were born in June 1983 in Beirut. This was a year after the Israeli invasion of Beirut, the besieging of Beirut, in which thousands of people died. And they say that the child is the father of the adult. How do you think that being born in that context affected your political views today?
So just as a little backstory, my father is Irish American. He was teaching at AUB, the American University of Beirut, and my mother was a student there. And her father was born in Nazareth in Palestine, and he was also teaching at AUB. And obviously, everything was kicking off around that time. And my family, we had to run around. We had the house. There was bombs going off. There were shells flying in the windows, and we had to flee. And we were hiding out. And I obviously don't remember this. I'm 1 years old. But my mother still has a certain amount of PTSD from that. She can't deal with fireworks, etc. And for the longest time, I sort of, I suppose, had this history, but never really talked too much about it. Because I didn't know enough about it. It wasn't talked about too much in my family about the ins and outs of what happened during that time. But while I was growing up, I grew up in a very Arab, Middle Eastern household. We always eat the cuisine, and I grew up with Persians and Arabs, and my grandfather was a real advocate for world peace and did these world peace programs alongside my dad, um, internationally, where students from around the world would come and study the world's religions and cultures, and in an effort to promote peace talks and also global understanding of the peoples of the world, which was profoundly enlightening way to grow up with that many different cultures. And I grew up by default in Ohio because after we were evacuated, my dad being American, we had the luxury of being able to be evacuated from Beirut at that time, and he ended up landing a job in Ohio, and so that's where I grew up. But I definitely did feel slightly different. And, you look at me, you think, oh, it's a white dude or whatever. I don't know, maybe not, but I didn't feel that way, you know. And especially when friends would come over and we have hummus and other kinds of food, and everyone's kind of going, what are you eating, man? And I felt like I wanted to hide that part of myself a little bit. You do when you're young, and I was very shy. You want to fit in, you want to be accepted, and anything that makes you feel too different sometimes is stifled. And I felt for a number of years it was a part of me that I was unconsciously slightly embarrassed about. Um, and I suppose that built up this sense of not belonging. And for a long time, that was this kind of festering thing that I ended up putting into my work, my art, my music. And I feel like, just to get back to the question, that kind of extrication from one place as an infant, a newborn, into another place, being an outsider all the time, has always been it's become my armor, I suppose. And fast forward to now, it's gotten to the point where I'm like feeling a connection again to my Arab roots, and feeling empowered by that, and going, this is my people as well. And I guess I spent a long time always being the outsider, moving from school to school, and I suppose that's part of what it must feel like to many of the refugees, of not having their roots, not being able to feel at home where they are. And I guess that's where I feel slightly akin to that, on a different level, of course. But I don't know if I answered the question there, but that's just a little backstory.
No, absolutely. And, part of the challenge posed by diaspora is finding a way to assert memory against the systematized forgetfulness. And when
Mm,
you're talking about the message being communicated to you, whether implicitly or I'm sure it's sometimes explicitly within US society, that you had something to be ashamed of.
mm,
What do you think was A, the force behind that, and B, the vehicle for that force? Because it can't have been coincidental considering the context within which you grew up, whether it was the Gulf War, whether it was the Israeli occupation of Lebanon, whether it was Israeli wars upon Palestinians, whether it was US foreign policy around the world. What do you think was that force, and how do you think that vehicle was pushing through your life? And where did these other people who may have made you feel that you had something to be ashamed of, where did they get these notions from?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I guess it kind of comes down to this. Uh, well, I mean, it's xenophobia really at its crux. I mean, it's ingrained in kids from such a young age, and um, kind of imperialist, homogenized societies where it's like this is our world, and who are you? And I think the thing is, kids aren't to blame necessarily, right? They're basically in these isolated bubbles where these this homogeny is concocted, and they just kind of act on what their parents have been acting on for however many generations. And I suppose it's a generational xenophobic mentality, um, which you get to more progressive places like Ohio. Obviously, you look at America, everything like in the middle is behind the times as far as embracing culture and etc. But you go to New York, you go to California, and it's less of a aggressive thing. Um, so it's also partially where I grew up, farmland America. Um, but yeah, I think it's a lot to do with that, the other, and just not understanding. It's ignorance, really. It's ignorance of other cultures and feeling threatened by things that are different.
Absolutely. I mean, also the interesting thing about the sort of trajectory of Arab life within the United States is that within the late 1800s, early 1900s, the earliest Arab migrants to the United States actually won a legal battle to have themselves legally defined and designated as Caucasian. Now, the interesting thing about the way that the idea of race is manufactured is that it is without a doubt that within the war on terror period, where you have had mass FBI infiltration of local Arab communities, where, of course, you had the ADL in tandem with the FBI infiltrating Arab communities, where you also had the Patriot Act allowing mass access to basically whatever they want without the involvement of a judge, and most of that striking most sharply against Arabs within the United States, a kind of acquiescence which is drilled into Arab Americans, this idea that you have to salute the flag first and foremost, the indoctrination from school level of singing the national anthem, pledging allegiance to the flag. It has meant that that idea of Arabs as quote unquote Caucasians has changed clearly in the war on terror period. One of my sort of convictions would be that one of the main purveyors of these ideas about people would be the second largest export from the United States. The first largest export being weapons, the second being Hollywood. And those two, interestingly, are intertwined in
Mm,
several quite interesting ways. But the question I wanted to ask, and I guess it's kind of self-explanatory when understanding that there was this kind of dormant uh, wealth of or treasure chest of memories that you had on some level that would have at least left some type of biological mark on your
Mm,
brain in terms of being that close to war at such an
mm.
early age. While your brain wouldn't have developed to the point where you had memories formed, there would have been some type of physical mark left on your brain from that experience.
Yeah.
But the question I was going to ask you next is then, how did you come to number one, be in a position where you had an awareness about the sort of silence that you were maintaining, whether that was because fear for being uninformed, or whether that was fear for the controversy that it might invite, or other people's interpretations of what you were doing. How did that happen? But then also, how did that then change to this decision, which I think we can definitely and should build upon? You know, there are many others in positions similar to yours who, at least on a confidential level, need to band together and organize and coordinate in terms of things that they do, because obviously strength is when we collectivize, and strength is in numbers. So how did that change around happen, Michael?
Yeah. So I suppose when I started off in the entertainment industry, for me, it always began with music. Music was my first, um, well, it's always first for me. Music. It's my life. I spend way too much time thinking about, listening, absorbing, sharing music. So I was so focused on creating that I felt like everything else that was going on was just irrelevant to what I was trying to do, right? And the further I kind of got with it, I remember there was one time. Now that this is just something that just jumped in my head, so I'm going to jump on it. But about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, or something, I posted a picture when I was filming something in Ireland that said "Free Gaza." It was on the edge of a like a pier, right? And it looked wicked. There was like an old boat next to it, and I took a picture of it and I posted it. And I knew very limited information about it at the time. All I knew is that I thought what was happening there was probably wrong, because it seemed pretty wrong to me from my base understanding. And I remember when I posted that on Instagram, I got this crazy backlash. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. Do you live here? All the classic diversion and whatever tactics. And I kind of was reading through these comments, and I responded to a few, and then I started doing a bit of research, and then I was just like, I'm just going to take the post off. I took the post off, and then I got some backlash for removing the post, and then it just became this whole, mess. And that made me shirk away from doing anything political for a bit, because I was like, look, I don't want to make people upset. I don't want to ostracize people, make them feel like I'm not listening to their side of the story. And I think this is where a lot of people fall with this. They're like, I know that there's and an important point also is we can't help what we're born into, right? Um, whether you're an Israeli, whether you're an Arab, whether you're American, whether you're, etc. And it's it's important that we remember that, so we don't completely demonize an entire population of people based on some of these things. However, fast forward again. Now, my interest with music has got me to a point where I'm very interested in music from around the world. So I go into these deep dives with, Scandinavian metal, or avant-garde jazz in Siberia and stuff like that. And I went into this nosedive with Arab hip hop and Palestinian hip hop. So I found this group called Damn. I don't know if you know them,
Yeah.
Tamer Nafer. And anyway, I was like, this is incredible stuff. I don't speak Arabic, but for me, it doesn't matter. I listen to metal too. I don't know what they're singing about half the time, but you get the vibe, you get the energy of it, and I love the energy of that group. And so I started following them on social media. I messaged them saying I love the record. We should collaborate sometime. You know, whatever. Let's connect. And this is right when I started kind of focusing on. This is around when things started kicking off again, May of this year, I believe. And they got on a couple lives when they were in the streets, right, in Lid and in Haifa and various other places. And I remember following what was going on. And then I started kind of looking at these articles and researching more. And I think having made this connection with them really made me understand it on a different level than if it was just strangers. And I remember in Haifa, you know, because I went to Haifa when I was in my early 20s, I believe. And I remember seeing the live um, coming from Haifa with the soldiers in the streets and the settlers chanting all these horrible things, having free reign of the streets, and remembering being there, walking down the street myself. And I felt this kind of real connection, this blood connection with that. And it was around that time and that moment specifically where I felt I need to I need to get on this. I need to start posting stuff. I need people to understand that this is completely not right. What's happening? It's a completely unbalanced situation where you have the Palestinians in the streets who are unable to express themselves by flying a flag. They're not able to have freedom of movement, and you have a lot of these settlers that are just walking through the blockades, and all the Palestinian Arabs are having to stay at the checkpoints, be searched, often arrested. You know all this, but obviously for the listeners and anybody of my fans tuning in, it's important to reiterate some of these things. And I just was baffled at how brazen it had gotten out there. Um, just obvious racism. Um, and yeah, it just got to the point where I was like, you know what? Anybody who, going back to when I was worried about ostracizing people, right? I was like, look, if anybody is going to cast me out based on exposing what I think is a completely inhumanitarian and unjust situation, then why? Bye bye. You know, hopefully it'll give you something to think about. That somebody that you used to respect has gone against what your beliefs are. Maybe it'll make them think about it again. You know, and I am, like I always say, no expert on these matters, and I really don't think you have to be. And I think this is one of the biggest problems with this situation is that people think that they don't know enough to be able to have an opinion. And
Yeah.
I would beg to differ. I say the facts are there. There's enough information out there to show that this government has been breaking all of these UN resolutions. It's basically saying, look over here, yeah, but this, while they participate in ethnic cleansing. And I think people shouldn't shy away from calling it what it is just because they're worried about backlash.
Absolutely. I was going to say one thing I've also noticed as a musician is you are an independent artist.
Yeah.
Is that a conscious decision, or is that a situation where, in terms of with the music industry, I'm independent too. It hasn't been by choice. I think that the way that the music industry is changing now and has changed with particular appointments at YouTube since 2017, you've seen people who have a greater loyalty to the music industry in quite important positions. And algorithmically, it's a bit harder now for independent artists to drive traffic towards their music than it was, say, 10 years ago. So is that a choice to be independent? And what's the kind of outlook in terms of working as an independent artist? We'll push the tour later on also, of course. And I'm looking forward to when you come to London. I'm gonna
Yeah,
be
man. Yeah. Get you a little stall.
wicked, man.
So yeah, I mean, so I actually love being independent because it allows me free creative control. It allows me to put stuff out when I want to, when I'm ready. There's nobody hovering over me, um, trying to get me to do stuff I don't want to do. Um, I don't like overworking. You know, I think we all need to be wary about that. I think
Mm.
it's a real problem in this day and age where you feel like you need to constantly be creating content and all this crap. And I think it gets in the way of genuine creativity because you're thinking of yourself as a commodity, as a business. And it's so counterintuitive to a lot of artists to think of themselves like that. And one of the biggest crimes in the music industry, besides streaming services and the problems with that, um, is this idea that we need to be focusing on branding, and that's almost more important than what you're creating. If you create a good brand, people will buy it no matter what. In a way, do you know what I mean? Um, However, that being said, you have to play the game a little bit. But for me, I grew up with punk rock. That was my first feeling of acceptance, going back to feeling like an outsider. That's when I first felt like I found my people. Other people who didn't quite fit in, that fallen between the cracks, that either weren't good at school or looked different or wanted to look different because they felt so different inside, you know. It was like a little society of outcasts and people that found solidarity together. And it was a real lesson to me in that, um, and building together, um, um, the unity, and also like bands and labels like you know, Discord Records, Ian Mackay, Fugazi, you know, and how they built these labels themselves, how they controlled the energy of what they were doing. Handwritten lyrics, you know, random snapshots and stuff. I loved the personal aspect of that. Whereas I grew up in a time where CDs were just coming out. So everything was like plastic, all like, you know, the logos looked like they were all kind of done in a similar way. And it was like I don't know, it just felt processed. Whereas like the 7 inches and the zines and stuff you'd read just felt like someone's made this as opposed to someone has processed this in a factory. You know what I mean? And I guess I've always had that chip on my shoulder about um, major label shenanigans, though it's changing a bit, you know, especially with heavy music. There's a lot of other labels that really value that sense of the artist first. And I take my hat off to them for fighting against the conglomerate agencies. Um, but yeah,
So
so it's kind of been a personal choice to remain independent. Although the issues I've faced because of that have been that you have to do your own PR. You have to be constantly pushing your stuff out there. You have to do a lot more work, um, and that's when it gets hard.
yeah, I mean, the interesting thing it seems is that you found music as a way of dealing with alienation and kind of breaking alienation in a way that you had felt growing up in the United States. I think that on some level, when we look at the alienation which a lot of young people face, there's a direct relation to the propaganda which is dominant and the sort of cultural ambience of the time. Now, Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud and a seminal thinker on the issue of propaganda, he worked for the United Fruit Company, which was able to get the help of Eisenhower and the CIA and the British government under Winston Churchill in 1954 to assist them in overthrowing the democratically elected leader of Guatemala, Arbenz. Now, Edward Bernays, in his book Propaganda, puts it in the following way. Governments depend upon acquiescent public opinion for success of their efforts. And in fact, government is government only by virtue of public acquiescence. He continues, as civilization has become more complex and as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. As he puts it in the beginning of his chapter, Organizing Chaos, in the book, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Now, when we look at, as we mentioned earlier, this intertwining of the US's number one and number two exports, we see it's been revealed that over 800 films in Hollywood and over 1,000 network television shows have had involvement by the national security state over the last century or so. We are talking about different forms of involvement, whether it is the film makers approaching these agencies in order to rent equipment, and the reply being given that they can get the equipment for free as long as they give one of these agencies access to their script and then can take suggestions in terms of editing on those scripts. So what we've seen is, whether it's the case of Independence Day, you saw a whole new character created in order to reflect positively on the US military, or whether it was Godzilla, where you saw a whole storyline changed in order to reflect positively on nuclear weapons and the US military. But as far as we understand, the First Amendment in the US Constitution is supposedly used to guarantee freedom of speech. But the Supreme Court interprets the First Amendment as meaning that the US government cannot participate in viewpoint discrimination, meaning if one film or one group of filmmakers approaches them and asks to rent equipment, they do not have the right to refuse to cooperate. And they certainly wouldn't have the right to interfere and sort of effectively co-produce these films. When we look at even films that we know of that are iconic in a cultural sense, you had an organization called the Office for Policy Coordination, which was a CIA-based think tank that got two members of their psychological warfare team to negotiate with George Orwell's widow, Sonia Blair, to get the rights to the animal farm. And in the end, the deal that was struck, Carlton Alsop of the OPC really acted as middleman for that deal. You even saw the film 1984 by Michael Redgrave being overseen by the American Committee for Cultural Freedom, which was a front for the CIA. And of course, this extends to today, where you've seen Phil Alden and Ben Affleck, when they were making the film The Sum of All Fears, going to the CIA and meeting with the director, George Tenet, at that time. It was also reported in Australian newspapers that Tom Cruise, when making Mission Impossible 3, had a meeting with CIA officials to discuss ways to present the CIA in a positive light, whether it's a film like The Hulk or Homeland or 24, which was a CIA initiative, the Terminator series. We have seen from the Marvel work, the Transformers, Iron Man, Zero Dark 30, and even the series NCIS, where you had whole plot lines dictated by the security state. We have seen Hollywood as a major vehicle through which the ideas of a largely invisible elite within our society are able to communicate their point of view in the hope that people will assimilate those viewpoints into their own. Essentially, Hollywood acting as a vehicle of cultural engineering. If you were to think about your own experience, can you see any echo of that?
And that,
Not necessarily in your immediate experience, whether it
yeah,
was, for instance, growing up. And so, for instance, for me, I would say that the film Borat has had a really negative effect on a lot of people in the world. Their perception of a civilization in Kazakhstan is forever affected
mm,
by
mm,
this depiction of someone not from the country. And it was actually shocking to me that a new version of the film was brought out recently, post Black Lives Matter, post a period where supposedly the film industry, the music industry, and these major companies were writing these kind of smarmy messages talking about we're listening and we're learning and we're changing. And yet you will put out a film which depicts a whole group of people, which in the United States and in the UK, very little is known about, as practicing incest, as drinking urine, as being generally um, uncivilized
yeah.
people. Now, what do you think in terms of your experience?
Well, I mean, that's all very comprehensive, and it's mind blowing, really, but also not surprising. And I mean, if I were to kind of backtrack and think of a lot of the formative films I saw growing up, it's I could find little gems here and there that support this. Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the major ones is this whole white savior complex thing that's littered in almost every American film, especially if it has to do with foreign policy and war, but also like the things with like a white person coming into a black school and all of a sudden making the team work and all that stuff. This I think that's a very rife through line. But yeah, as far as the um, people's involvement, the government's involvement, it's very clever how they do this. It's subtle, it's behind the scenes, and the I don't know if it's the majority, but like um, a massive amount of people who watch TV don't think about this stuff at all. They're being entertained. They're wanting distractions. So they're willfully accepting these subliminal messages over years. I mean, just to bring it personal real quick, like I still have people that call me by my characters' names or are surprised when I'm different to my character. So the conditioning is so explicit that they have trouble differentiating from fiction and reality a lot of the time. I worked with a wonderful actor in the UK for a while who played a baddie on, I forget what it was, one of the major Emmerdale or something like that, right? One of the soapy things. And he'd get chucked out of pubs. He'd get some people would throw shit at him on the streets, be like, "Yeah, you villain," blah blah blah. And he's like, he's a very well-meaning, good actor who obviously nailed it because he came across as so evil. But I think a lot of the general population just believes what they see, and this goes down to obviously like the crap that they spit in the Daily Mail and other certain rags where people just get that through their door. They read it and they think that that's what's happening. And one of the positive things in this crazy climate is that I think a lot of people that weren't before are waking up to the fact that they are being controlled and brainwashed by the media corporations. It's obviously gotten to a point where it's become a bit poisonous because nobody knows who to trust. So they end up going inward. But I think we're at this very interesting and important place in our human history where we're awakening. And I
Mm.
think if we focus on that actually positive thing, maybe we can, like you said, organize, work together, build something that is real, that is based in truth and camaraderie. And it's like you said before, it's like it's I don't know if it was this conversation or something I saw you, I've been following what you've been doing. Um, the workers, I mean, if the 1% is 1%, the 99% are technically stronger. If the workers can get together and realize the power that we have, if we coordinate, we have the power to make massive changes. And it comes down to small conversations like this,
Yeah.
or ones that you have in a pub with someone who's working. And I feel like there has to be this respect for everybody in whatever job they're working, as opposed to there being some tier system of education and how many degrees you have or whatever. Like, if all the plumbers go on strike, who's gonna fix your shitter? And then your whole world is going to be a mess and your house is going to stink, right? So it's like, it's having respect and understanding and empathy for people who have low paying or seemingly mundane jobs. And I believe that we all have important work.
Yeah. I mean, and what,
I'm spiraling off of that, but
not at all. In what you're
yeah.
saying, there's a clear uh, pointing to the people that make up the lungs, the heart, and the spine of any society. And they say that infrastructure is invisible until it malfunctions. Well, often the people that society is reliant upon are invisible until they go on strike. So,
Yeah.
yes, we are calling for industrial action on this podcast over many important causes. But when we look at something like Sony Pictures Entertainment, particularly thinking about these connections with the military industrial complex and even with Israel, we see its former chairman or chairperson, Amy Pascal, who was the highest paid woman within the organization. She, as was revealed by the WikiLeaks Sony leaks that looked at emails of Sony employees during Israel's 2014 massacre of over 2,300 people in Gaza, Amy Pascal was organizing via something called the Israel Project. Within her inbox, there were emails organizing face-to-face video meetings with currently serving IDF commanders. You also have, who was previously the CEO of Sony Pictures Entertainment at the same time that Amy Pascal was the chairperson, Michael Linton. Now, Michael Linton is on the board of trustees for the Rand Corporation. Now, the United States military is something that has several branches. Now, its justification branch and its thinking branch are very much including the Rand Corporation. He sits on that board of trustees alongside the former director of the Center for Counterterrorism in the US government. Now, what are people that are part of organizations that make films doing in these organizations, which are clearly political organizations and are clearly involved in violence? At the time of the 2014 massacre, as is clear for all to see in the WikiLeaks documents, you had a group of figures within Sony make an email chain thinking of ways that they could support Israel. Now, right at the beginning of that email chain, Kobe Marom, an IDF commander, was inserted into the conversation. So we're seeing a company like Sony Pictures Entertainment, which is responsible for some of the biggest films in human history, having its inbox used as a mobilization point for pro-Israel actors. You even had Russell Simmons, who is obviously famous because of Def Jam and other things he was involved in hip hop, saying that he wants to launch a campaign to help Israel within that email chain, saying he wants to find Arab and Muslim voices who can come forward and assert Israel's right to exist. What is happening here? We are not outnumbered, we are merely out-organized. And the point is that these companies, if the inboxes are like this in times of extreme violence, where thousands of people are being killed by the Israeli army, then what does it mean about the films which are ghettoized outside the eyesight of the masses? What does it mean about the actors who find themselves blacklisted? What does it mean about the musicians who don't get signed, who don't get playlisted on the radio? What does all this say about our society today and about the manufacturing of consent within it?
I mean, I think he's just said it all there. I mean, the connection is clear. I think the thing is, it's gotten to a point where the narrative is being challenged to a more voracious level than it ever has been before, obviously due to social media and more voices being a part of the conversation. There seems to be more panic in the air from the Israeli standpoint. The facade seems to be crumbling a little bit. But it's very, very alarming to find out about these Sony hacks and see how deeply and subconsciously this stuff is being put out there.
I mean,
and also it's very fear based, I think, for a lot of people who just go, I don't, yeah, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I'm on contract.
I mean, also, the other thing that's interesting is the Rand Corporation's relationship with Sony is not limited to Michael Linton. You know, Amy Pascal's father was one of the key figures within the Rand Corporation. But also, we know of Sony Pictures Entertainment as being the home of James Bond. But unfortunately, despite the fact everyone knows that James Bond is about a spook, there hasn't been much critical analysis of the author of James Bond, Ian Fleming. You know, this man was a spy for British naval intelligence. He, alongside others in the United States, wrote the blueprint for the Office of the Coordinator of Information. This was the department of the US government that later on became the Office of Strategic Services and eventually became the CIA. We also know that after World War II, Ian Fleming went from working for British intelligence in numerous different roles and having this role in building what would become the CIA to becoming the foreign manager of the Kemsley newspaper group. That was the firm at the time that owned the Sunday Times. Now, we know that in terms of his personal circle, he had figures such as the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles. Can we really take the creations of actors such as Ian Fleming as completely separate from the society in which he was active? Can we really understand the information that we are taking in as being coming from some sort of organic place? It is not untainted by the stratifications of our society. And I think if there's one thing that would be useful also for us to do, it would be to cultivate a criticality among young people about the information that they are taking in from Hollywood and the way in which it may be affecting their opinions. Because this is, as Edward Bernays said, the perfect medium through which opinions can be regimented. Now, you know, it's been so great having you, bro. I have one more question for you. I appreciate you making the time. I know that you are busy. I'm looking forward to you coming to London. I'm going to be there 100%. I'm getting my ticket. in terms of young people out there who are hoping to get into the acting industry, it's not an easy industry to break into, especially when we think of the sparse nature of Arab presence, at least people of Arab origin, people of the Arab diaspora involved in Hollywood today, outside of playing stereotypes which seem to either directly or indirectly serve the military industrial complex. You know, you have not got through the door playing a terrorist, for example. You have not got through the door playing a stereotype. Now, how is it that young people that look at you and what you've done can hope to do the same?
Man, I mean, it's been a journey, to be honest. And there's obviously a sprinkle of luck here and there, but at the same time, I've got a real boneheaded drive where when I want to do something, I'm gonna give everything, you know. And I think the biggest advice I give to anybody is be your true self, and that's for anybody doing anything. Um, um, you know, just you walking on the stage or walking onto a screen um, is interesting. You see somebody, the way they walk, you see the facial expressions they have. You start to see, if it's film, you see the inner workings of what they're thinking about based on small movements of their eyes. You don't have to do anything more than be. And I think that's something that's taken me years to understand. Just showing up and having the audacity to do nothing, to be yourself. And there's much more humility in acting than there is bombast, and there should be at least. And obviously, alongside that comes the idea of don't be someone's doormat either. You know, don't allow yourself to be completely subjugated into being just this. You know, I'm working for you, and this is my role. You know, I'm hired to be an artist, and I'll always stand with my head high, saying you're hiring me to do my work, and it's not more important than anybody else's work. Just like what we talked about, every worker on the set has a crucial job, and I'll always give respect to everybody and their work. You always make room for them. And there's a lot of actors out there that think that they're above the other people on the set because the camera's on them all the time. So it's about me, you know, what my needs are. I need some peeled grapes, you know, you know, and always be humble and give respect to everybody on the set, not just the people who you think are going to employ you. And I have basically 3 rules of success. These are the Malarkey. This is the Malarkey method, if you will. Number 1, deliver the goods. Be a boss of what you do. Let no one question that you're delivering the goods. Number 2, don't be a dick. And that includes not gossiping. Now, this is a hard one for so many people, but I believe that gossip just comes back and bites you in the ass. And it also is connecting on a is trying to create positivity out of negativity. And that makes people feel connected, and they feel happy that they've connected. Say, yeah, there's such a dick, he's a dick, you know, blah blah blah. Oh yeah, now we're so connected, and we feel good about it. But it's basically it's festering, you know, something that eventually turns into even more negative energy. So, number 1, deliver the goods. Number 2, don't be a dick. Number 3, have fun. These are the simple rules, you know, for me, that I feel like when I work with other people that, whether they know it or not, are doing those things, you want to work with them again. They approach the work with humility, with a sense of camaraderie and fun, and they're great to watch. And anybody who's at the beginning or later on in their career, I'd encourage to look at the Malarkey method.
Sure.
I suppose it's worked for me. I mean, as far as Middle Eastern roles, I mean, I basically had a free pass being called Michael Malarkey, And I don't, I've basically not had to think too much about that. And hesitate calling it lucky, because that's not how I feel about it. You know what I mean? But I've basically evaded that potential trajectory of having to sidestep certain roles or whatever. However, I do believe that in the wake of inclusion and equality of what's happening in the world, we are moving towards a place where it's going to be a lot more of a conversation as far as Middle Eastern roles too, because going back to what we talked about in the subconscious infiltration of the government agenda, we've seen in the War of Terror years, Arabs depicted solely as terrorists or refugees or people who own a shop, with their family who are struggling,
and those are the generous depictions.
That's right.
Those depictions are the more generous ones.
That's right. Yeah, and I would think that the way things are going, we are going to start seeing a lot more, in my optimistic mind, empathetic portrayals and more understanding of the culture in a way that goes beyond political shit, because it's people. People are people. Everybody comes from a different place. People come from different religions. Some people come from different, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the more we can realize that we are all the same, struggling against a system that's built to oppress us, really, and juice us, and they get the lemonade, the more we realize that, the more I think we can bandy together and realize that we need to make the change together. They're not going to do it for us. They've showed that time and time again. And it's up to us. We've been conditioned to wait around for our turn in a way.
Yeah.
And our turn is passing by. So to the young, it's on you. All we can do as the mid generation is provide the information, set up things, try to get people engaged and talking. And so, this goes back to why I started talking about these things. It's like, I don't know what to do, but I know what to talk about at the moment. And so I'm hoping to inspire other young voices to get together and be like, yo, I'm pissed off. I'm left out. I feel the same. What can we do? They are so in tune with technology that they have the power to organize in a way that is completely unheard of to us, So I believe in the younger generation. I really do. And I hope we can help encourage them to start acting more from their hearts and their minds.
Beautiful, man. Let's continue the conversation. Let's keep building. Just before we go, if you could tell the viewers where they can hear your music, when you're going to be on tour, and where you think they can pick up tickets, and just let us know that, bro.
Yeah, so you can check out my music on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, however you roll. Michael Malarkey is my name. Just search for it. I'll be on tour in Europe next March and beginning of April, a couple weeks. I'll be heading through London, Paris, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Berlin, Warsaw, Prague, Budapest, Vienna, Milan, Munich, Cologne, and Amsterdam. So at the moment, it's a European tour. That goes from March 18th through April 2nd. You can get tickets on my website. So there's VIP bundles and things like that. And I've got a new little EP I'm working on, which will be available for the tour, if not before.
So, brilliant, man. We'll be tuned in. Thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you.